Okay, so wanted to do just a few videos on vellum, parchment, same thing. I haven't done any videos for quite a long time, and the reason being that in addition to me just being very busy, the books I've been restoring have been sort of books like this, sort of big old 400-year-old folios. And I've done a sequence of them, and the method of doing it's basically the same. So there's no point pointing, sort of posting videos of exactly the same kind of restoration. However, with this particular book, I was able to harvest from the boards, as I was recycling the leather onto another volume, these two strips of parchment. And initially I'd had a hope, there's a piece of medieval manuscript here, that could be interesting in its own right. However, these are completely blank. There's absolutely no writing on them whatsoever. They're obviously offcuts off of a much bigger piece. I've no idea how old they are. Minimum, obviously, the age of the book, which is a 1613 volume, so more than 400 years. How much older than that, though, I don't know. So I thought this gave us a bit of a unique opportunity. I will freely admit, I am terrified of this in terms of my ability to actually use it to restore books. I don't know what happens if it gets wet. Does it shrink? Does it stretch? Does it just fall apart? Does it rot? One painful lesson I did learn was I had a board like this from another volume. I soaked off the leather. The board did not fall apart. And I thought myself extremely clever that I was going to have a board as well that I could use for another volume. The only problem was, within a week, it erupted into an ecosystem of every single fungus that probably ever existed in Renaissance Europe and caused quite an incident. So things are never quite as easy as you think they are. So I've no idea what's going to happen. I haven't been able to find anything online on how to use or recycle really old parchment, which is a shame because I actually have books bound in vellum which are damaged. They've got big chips, and I would love to actually be able to repair them, but I don't have the skills, and there's nothing easily available to teach me how to do this. So these strips offer an opportunity to just experiment. So I don't know what's going to happen. I'm gonna put one of these in water, and we're going to see what happens. And it's whatever it will be, will be. I'm going to use this one. This has a split developing down it, so it's going to be an interesting bit of the learning to see, does the split stop? Does it perpetuate? What happens when we get this wet? The other thing to bear in mind here are the dimensions. So these particular strips are basically 1/4 of an inch shorter than the boards from which they came. Just put it out there. So we know how the size that they were. So when we try and clean these, soak them, we'll see what size they become. So that's the experiment. We'll see what happens next. Okay, here we go. Okay, pressing it. First thing to say is the world did not end. Now on the surface here, this is a little bit of leather, just here, from where the sort of main calf was sort of folded over. And then we do have wood fibre from the paste down up here. These marks are from where the leather thongs were, sort of the ribs of the book, in other words, were sort of pulled through. So that's what that is. Okay. I'm able with my finger just to gently scrape off the wood fibres as they soften. It's not causing, no evidence yet of any horrible decomposition of the vellum. It does have a slightly sort of slimy feel to it. So the way, from the little I've studied on this, vellum was basically lime, sort of animal skin that was soaked in a lime, and I guess that lime, being alkaline, would basically feel soapy to the touch as it sort of gets back into water. It's now starting to soften. Even this sort of crease where it was folded around the book for 400 years is starting to soften. Starting to get the wood fibre off where the leather's folded, so hopefully the leather itself will come off momentarily. There doesn't seem to be any massive loss of structure, that's the main thing. Let's turn it over. So, when dry, the vellum had this sort of milky look to it. As I sort of, as time passes with it being underwater here, it gets a little sort of grayer, I guess. Let's see how flexible it is. Certainly flexible. Maybe getting a bit translucent as well. Okay, this leather's starting to sort of peel off here at the bottom. Vellum, however, is holding its own, so it's not as if the vellum is ripping as I sort of tease that leather away. Continuing, there's still some resistance around the fold where it was obviously folded around the edge of the board, so it's not giving that up rapidly. The rest of it is quite, there we go, it's got this sheen to it, and you can probably see just with my fingers there, it's becoming really translucent. It's losing the white colour and just becoming much more translucent. The real experiment here is going to be what happens to it when it dries now. There we go. We soaked it, and the world did not end. It's going to take a while, I think, for this to find these edges to finally kind of surrender, as it were. But there may be some like old glue in this fold as well, that's making it more resilient. So what I think I'm going to do this leather's peeling away slowly. Notice I'm able to put quite a bit of force on it. The vellum doesn't rip. I can pull on this. This vellum always impresses me by just how resilient it is. It's amazing stuff, which of course is why it was a fabric of choice for, or a material of choice for important documents and so on for hundreds and hundreds of years. It didn't rip as I did that, and I was putting reasonable force on the leather deliberately, just as an experiment. So there we go. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this out of the water, dry it off, and of course it's got its twin, so it'd be good to actually compare we can in effect compare before and after by comparing with its sibling over there, and then we'll leave it to dry and we'll see what changes as it dries. Okay, let's do this. It's keeping that slightly sort of slimy feel to it. Interestingly, it's kind of wanting to pull away from where it's split, which goes to show this was probably under quite a bit of tension when it was originally folded, which is, I guess, why it split. So, I guess that's a natural attribute of the skin itself. So what I'm going to do now is just take off as much of the water as I can with this kitchen toweling here. Okay, so now what we're going to do is compare this with its twin to get a sense of the before and after. Just make sure that surface is dry. So this is the one that we've just subjected to all that mistreatment. You can see the differences in coloration here. I'm assuming that's where glue was applied, maybe back in the day. Different amounts of glue, because I can just see here this line, as it were. Here is the other one. Now that's fascinating. So it appears that when you get vellum wet, it shrinks. I'll line up the bottom as best I can. We look at the top. There's now a difference of maybe, I don't know, almost half an inch. Let's bring the book back, from which the vellum came from. That's the ultimate template. Yeah. The vellum itself was originally about a 1/4 inch shorter than the book. You can see the difference there. Which I think makes sense because from the little I know, vellum was made by stretching animal skin on a frame. So I guess the moment you give the vellum the opportunity to undo that, it will take it. So anyway, what we're going to do now is we're going to leave this to dry. The way I'm going to probably do this is put it on an absorbent surface. I'm going to try and see if it will willingly go flat and stay flat as it dries, or whether it's going to want to kind of restore some of its original shape. So for example, this section here desperately wants to kind of bow up. You can probably see that. What I'm going to do is press it flat, and as it dries we'll see if it stays flat, because that's pretty fundamental to, you know, the characteristics of vellum and, you know, using it to restore things. So okay, so make sure that it's flat. These locks on. That leaves me a gap in the middle. That's a little bit not what I want. Just put them together. Double the weight on, and we'll see what happens. So while the vellum was drying, I took the opportunity just to trim the leather. It's going to go onto this book. It's going to look very beautiful indeed, I think. Anyway, back to the subject at hand. Here you go, so let's see what's happened. Okay, so let's really get in here and see what this vellum's been up to. Bit of dampness here, don't think it's colour though. No. Okay. Still slightly moist, papery in a sense. Supple. The shrinking appears to have not been as pronounced now, which is kind of interesting. But overall, this seems pretty well behaved. But what's interesting is it's not sort of stiffening up and becoming rock hard again as it dries. It's staying supple. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to leave this exposed to the air, and it'll be interesting to see, does it become stiff as a board? Does it stay supple? Does it try to regain its original shape as it dries. And does this fold over? I don't know. We'll see. So that's the next step. I'm just going to now let it fully air dry. In fact, what I'm tempted to do is I'm actually going to get rid of this paper. I just want it to air dry. We'll see what happens to it. One thing I realised I didn't do, I was watching this dry and I was interested by this line. And one thing I noticed was I didn't clean the other side. There is a strip of paste down adhered to the vellum that I need to remove. And I failed to do this. So now I'm going to just tear it off. And now we're getting back to just vellum. And it's remarkable how translucent it is and how thin it is. So I think that's about it. All right. So now that that paper's off, we're going to continue to let it just dry out here. We have a bit of paper on the edge here as well. And we'll see how it turns out. It is still incredibly flexible. There is no sign whatsoever of this wanting to stiffen up in any way. So that might be an important lesson here, which is, you know, vellum was always meant to be supple. It only gets into this state if you add a few centuries. So, you know, recycling vellum means being willing to accept that you're going to end up with a supple cover, you know. So, anyway, we'll see how it turns out when the drying process is complete. Okay, so it's the following morning. Let's see how things turned out. On the left is the control, and on the right is the one that we soaked and cleaned. So, first thing to say is it's the stiffness has restored. So it isn't supple any longer. This bit here has a little bit of suppleness, just where the, I guess the skin is slightly thinner and more different. Different part of the animal, I guess, just here. So this is a little more supple, but this is pretty well the same if you adjust for the fact this still has paper and stuff on it. This is basically the same level of stiffness. It's curled up a little bit here. And, you know, it's trying to fold over a little bit here as well. But I guess what that tells me is this will actually potentially take a shape. Now, what was interesting was this stayed supple until it was almost bone dry. So, you know, there was just a tiny bit of water content. It was still very supple. And the water content, frankly, was so low that I wouldn't have any concerns about this being in contact with the pages of a book itself. So what that kind of means is, I think that vellum can actually be used with reasonable confidence, or, you know, or old vellum can be recycled with reasonable confidence, at least from the standpoint of soaking it and letting it dry. It hasn't shrunk to any great extent, so I can see. I know that initially I thought it had, but I think that was probably more just the shape of it being slightly different. So it's basically the same dimension. It's the same color. It's the same stiffness. I've been able to get rid of the majority of the paper and leather residue. And frankly, I could just reuse this again to do a repair on a vellum book should I need to. Now, obviously, this isn't common stuff. It's quite rare to find, vellum this old, so I'd need to be very sort of sparing with it, but I'm feeling pretty good that this this can be reused. There's also, I can tell you, there's no smell, there's no change in texture, this crack didn't get any worse, so I'm no longer scared of this, bluntly. Now, the one thing I haven't done is seen how this reacts to modern, glue, the glue I use, Elmer's school glue. So that'll be the next thing to try out. But so far, so good.